Hey, welcome back to the Pudgy Productions Patreon channel. Today we're going to talk about how to throw a bowl. First, I'm cleaning off my bat. You're going to want to make sure that you get your clay best in the center of your bat as possible. And the bat is that green thing I'm working on. Bam! Make sure you use a decent amount of force, that way it doesn't fly off the bat. The first thing we're going to do is hydrate the clay and cone down. The reason I do this again is to just make sure the clay is cemented on there and it's not going to fly off when I cone up. Which is the next process. Coning down, pushing away from myself with my left hand, and I'm applying pressure down with my right hand, and my right hand is on top. My right hand is now shaping the clay. My right hand is in a C shape. That's what gives it that humped shape. When I cone up, my left hand and my right hand both apply pressure in simultaneously. They start at the base and they rise up together. You want to make sure your hands stay steady and go at the same pace as the wheel. And again, when I cone down, just make sure everything stays steady, even beat. Left hand stays steady, applies pressure in. Right hand on top applies pressure down. You want to make sure it's about even on all sides. Again, compressing up with both hands. There's a little air bubble there, so we're going to scratch that out. So then next, when we cone down, again, left hand applies pressure out, right hand applies pressure down. As soon as the left hand touches the bat, no more need to push away, and you just want to make sure that you stay perfectly still and help round the outside of that clay and make it centered. And now that we've compressed down, we've gotten rid of that air bubble. All the air is fussed out. And for coning up and down, you want to do it as many times as you feel necessary. Start off with light pressure and add as you need, but you do want to make sure you're using enough pressure that the clay moves. You want to give yourself enough patience as well, so that when things mess up, you understand it's just about getting into the rhythm of how much force, how much speed, and how much water you really need. Next, once we've finished centering our form, we're going to open it out. Nice V shape. We're going to make a bowl, so I have my fingers at about a 45-degree angle. Next, we're going to measure the inside. There you go. You always want to measure and make sure you have a little extra room to play when you're making bowls. When you're making bowls, you're actually going to continue to scoop from the inside and the outside, so it's better to have a little extra space. Next, whenever you've reached your peak depth, let's call it, you're going to use your rib and shape the inside. Again, you want to make sure that your inside is pretty ideal throughout majority of your throwing process. It's more important than the outside if you had to pick one, because the outside's better off being taken care of when trimming. So next, hydrate your clay, hydrate your hands, compress the rib, and gently we pull up. The first pull I do, and the first usually few pulls I do, is with my right hand on the outside applying pressure inwards, and my inside left hand just basically coasting up with it and making sure that it doesn't go out of center. Your fingers should always stay connected, like two magnets in between a piece of paper. And if you're left-handed, you would just reverse the hands that I'm doing. So your left hand would be on the outside, on the left-hand side, and your right hand would be on the inside. And your wheel would be going clockwise. If you're right-handed, your wheel would be going counterclockwise. Strange, I know, but a fact for show. So now I'm alternating between using my inside hand and my outside hand when I'm pulling. Depending on if you want it to go wider or if you want it to go taller is dependent on which hand you're going to use. So if I want it to go taller, I'm going to use my outside hand, which for me is my right hand. And if I want it to go wider, I'm going to use my left hand, which is my inside hand. My non-dominant. Boo, 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 boo. How much pressure do you use? Well, I'd say the amount of pressure you use gently decreases from the very beginning to the very end. So when you're centering, you're going to have a lot of pressure that you use. And when you're finishing up your piece, when you're doing your final pulls, it's gentle touches at the end. So I'd say play around. If you're heavy-handed, you're probably going to have to dial back a little bit. And if you're feather touch from the jump, you're probably going to have to use a decent amount more force. So it's really unique per person. But it takes a while once you get your groove. And now my inside hand is shaping. So I'm pushing it wider to make it more into that bowl shape. And again, inside hand makes it wider, outside hand makes it taller. And when I say that, I mean which fingers are applying the most pressure. Here I'm just measuring it to make sure it's uniform with the other pieces I've been making. Not something you necessarily have to do. And this next step is really cool. I'm using my needle tool and I'm brushing it alongside the shape of the bowl. We're applying pressure straight down until the needle tool touches the bat, and then we're making that incision. I add water to make sure that the clay doesn't attach back into the form. And then use the needle tool again, cut underneath it. Then suddenly you have a little donut floating there. Cut it off, clean up the water, and you basically pre-trimmed your piece. So that's easier for you when you start next time. I'm just cleaning up all the excess and I'm giving it a final shaping once over. We're going to do one more shaping of this piece and clean up the outside with a rib. And as I mentioned, the inside form is the most important, but it's nice that the outside looks pretty aesthetically pleasing as well. Steady, steady feather light touches in the end. You always want to make sure your piece is clean. Compress the rim. Just applying pressure to that evenly. Make sure that the top stays uniform. Next, we're going to get all the excess water out from inside and clean up the outside of the piece. Do, 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 do. We're about to hop onto another form as well. If you're wondering why this video looks a little longer than the piece itself, I'm going to run through it one more time with you guys and give the best helpful tips I can. Hopefully, between the two videos, this starts to make sense. And if you see here, this easy transition is the main reason why I love using bats. It's just easier for production and cleanup work. Also lets your pieces dry before you have to cut them and alter them and maybe deform them in the process if you're working with fragile pieces or thinner pieces, maybe porcelain, things of that nature. Again, bam. Make sure your clay is in the center of the bat and you apply a decent amount of pressure down with them slaps. Cone down first. Outside hand, my left hand, is making sure that the piece stays rounded and beautiful. When we cone up, left hand and right hand, palms of both hands, apply pressure in. If you notice, my fingers are basically hangouts. They're just chilling. They don't really do anything. When I cone down, my left hand is on the outside, making sure that everything stays rounded and pretty in center. My top hand applies pressure down to form that clay into my left. So basically, when you cone up, both hands do the same thing on opposite sides. And when you cone down, your top hand forces the clay into your left hand, which shapes it. basic functions. So if your hands want to move a different way, slightly different, maybe one's higher, one's lower, whatever, then that's cool. As long as it ends up being centered and you end up getting there through healthy means, then that's what's most important. And remember, whenever you cone down, you want your top hand, so your right hand, for my case, because I'm right-handed, to be in a C formation, like I'm doing right now, so that you shape it well. You want to always make sure that it has that hump. And the reason being, when you cone up and down, you avoid any unnecessary air bubbles, but also it's an easy shape to start into. When I center, I just pick a confident place, when I make my center volcano, I just pick a confident place on the center top ring, and you can see it when it's in rotation where center is. I make sure I touch it, but I'm a little on the outside of it. You never want to be directly over the circle, because then you'll get swamped into the vortex and it might be off center. And again, I use my needle tool to poke all the way down to the bat and see how much space I have. And I give myself a healthy margin, but I make sure that it's not going to be a brick and hurt somebody. I'd say on average 1/4 of an inch base is nice, but if you're throwing a bowl, I'd say start with 1/2 an inch, because you're going to continue to scoop. So now you can see, as I did last time, we're going to cone up first, or not cone, we're going to pull up first. And I use my index, middle, and my ring finger on both hands when I do this. Sometimes I'm only using 2 fingers, my index and my middle, but sometimes I add that 3rd ring finger if I'm working with a bigger piece of clay. Again, remember that the pressure you're using between both hands is pretty light in comparison to the pressure that you used from the very beginning at this point. Continue to stay hydrated. I continue to clean up and hydrate my pieces so that I'm never using too much or too little. Bring it all the way to the top, and if you notice, whenever I do my pulls, I'm working in rhythm with the clay. We're not going against each other. Same thing with the wheel. So when the wheel is spinning, I'm spinning with it. We're going at the same beat. So, We're working together. If your wheel is going at a beat of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're going at a beat of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you're going to be off pace, and it's not going to match up. So you'll have a better throwing experience, centering experience, pulling experience, all of it, if you work in rhythm and in unison, and you listen to the clay and the wheel, and you kind of have this mutual dance between you all. Now I'm doing the final pulls. Here I'm pulling all the excess clay that's left, but I'm also shaping simultaneously. This is what's important. You don't just want to pull and shape, you want to pull and scoop. You really want to get all that extra clay from the bottom so that you get the biggest and most even piece possible from one utilized lump. Again, measuring for uniformity, alterations as needed. And I would say it's important to play around and see how much water you really need. The clay that you're working with is also going to dictate this. Some might want more than others. Depends on the day as well, and the bag. Kind of like people, right? If you notice, I'm always compressing that rim. If you keep the bottom centered, and if you keep the top centered, and you're doing your pulls somewhere along the middle, you're probably going to even the piece out. Making sure I'm getting all that excess clay from the inside, all that excess water and slip. Again, we're going to do our pre-trim cut. Pretty conservative with this one. It was hard to get a good angle. Then I drip water in down the sides, clean up all the extra water that's on the inside, and finish shaping it nicely. Cut underneath that ring with my needle tool. strip that piece off, and now I'll clean off the outsides and call this piece finito. Oh, that's my favorite part. Swish. So satisfying. And that metal rib is my favorite for shaping bowls on the outside of them because you can bend it. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, guys.